We are good to go.
Very good. Well, good afternoon. This is Tim O'Connell. I'll call the regularly scheduled hybrid meeting of the Utility Board to order. Elaine, if you could call the roll, please.
I sure will. Chair O'Connell,
I am present.
Vice Chair Quantz, Board Member Lair,
Present.
Board Member Milton, Board Member Olson,
Here.
Board Member White,
Present.
and Board Member Marshall. Thank you, Chair.
So that's 4 out of 7, so I think we do have a quorum. But that means my colleagues, you can't leave until the meeting's over. Um, with that, call for public appearances. Are there any individuals from the public who desire to address the board?
No public appearances this evening, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kenner. Thank you. Approval of minutes. Did everybody have the chance to review the minutes from our last meeting?
Yeah, I can move approval of the minutes.
Moved, second?
Second.
Second by Member Olson. Any discussion? Hearing none, they looked accurate to me. Call for approval. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Unanimous? Passes unanimous. All right, we have a number of rate discussions to attend to, so I think I'll recognize Mr. Kittner to start us off on that discussion.
Good evening, Utility Board members. Jason Kittner, Chief of Operations. With me this evening is a number of city staff, including folks from our Public Works Department, as well as key members of staff from the Finance Department, and then our consultant from the FCS group. This evening, we have a slightly different format than what we've done the last couple of years. We have we actually have rate proposals for the utility board review this evening, all in one fellow swoop, with the intent that we can get information to you early so that there can be some good discussion and deliberation, and obviously providing some additional time on the back end if additional discussions and conversations are needed. So with that, I'll invite Ben Schumacher to formally introduce the FCS group. And
Jason, can I stop you there, please, for a second?
sure.
Can you elaborate on what you mean by that? When you say discussion at the tail end, are you contemplating that we will not actually take up a vote on these today, but that will be the next meeting?
Chair O'Connell, if the board would like to take a vote on these this evening, we can certainly do that. However, just given the discussions that we've had previously in previous years, and the fact that we've split the rates up into sort of two conversations and sort of split it in half, we just want to make sure there was sufficient time for the board to have deliberation this evening. So, and not make you feel pinched in terms of your decision making for timing at this stage. If we get too far into the fall and we can't get to a recommendation, it's a different conversation, but we've built enough time on the front end to hopefully alleviate that discussion or those potential problems.
No, I appreciate that, and I think it's a good idea, because ordinarily we haven't started this until our next meeting, right, October. So this will be I think this will be a useful process. So
Haven't we in the past, at least my limited experience, we did 2 on one meeting and 2 on a different meeting. That's what we did last year.
Right.
Which
Right.
does have the advantage of spreading out a lot of data over 2 meetings having and stuff. But I think this is good.
Yeah, no, I concur. So, all right. Unless there's any other comment. Oh, and for the record, Elaine, I see that we have been joined by Board Member Marshall.
I've noted it.
Thank you. All right.
So with that, I will pass it to Mr. Schumacher, who can formally introduce the FCS group and the rest of the finance team this evening.
Thank you, Jason. So good evening, Utility Board. Like Jason said, my name is Ben Schumacher, financial analyst here at the City of Mercer Island. I am joined tonight by Angie Sanchez-Vernoche, who is a principal, and Chase Bozette, who is a project consultant with FCS, a Bowman company. They will be presenting the water, sewer, and stormwater portion of our utility rates a little bit later. I think the first item on our agenda, item number 2, is our EMS rates, which I will gladly walk the board through. Go ahead and share my screen.
Hey, sorry, this Todd. I just had a quick question.
Mhm.
Apologize, but what is the expectation for today? Is it to receive the information, or are we realistically expecting to actually take a vote today?
I'll say I'll
Let's see how things play out. As we were just talking about, I mean, ordinarily there's a lot of data here, and in previous years we've taken 2 passes at this. Typically, it's been EMS and stormwater, and then sewer. You know, sewer and water are the 2 that are the big ticket items and take the most time typically. So we've split those up. But I like this approach. Let's get the information, and if we feel ready to take a vote, of course, any member of the board can make such a motion. If we'd like to continue the discussion in our next meeting, that would be consistent. I mean, this is an involved process, and it's typically taken 2 meetings of the board to get through.
Great, thank you. I would expect we probably would want to go through all of the information and digest it fully, and then be prepared to make an informed decision. So thank you.
Concur? All right. So Ben, the floor is yours for the moment at least.
Thank you. Go ahead and share my screen. If I could just get confirmation that that is being shared, be awesome.
Yes, see it.
All right, excellent. So good evening, Utility Board. So I have a few slides to walk you through for our EMS rate updates. In terms of complexity, our emergency medical service rates are usually kind of the least complex utility in terms of the rate update process. So this should be pretty fast. I think there's only about 3 slides for me to run you through today. We'll cover our background for our EMS rates, some primary drivers on what causes these rates to increase or decrease year over year, and then our staff recommendation, and then we'll have time for questions and discussions at the end. So diving right into our emergency medical service rate history, it's a utility rate that originated in 1996. It's tied to the average budgeted salary and benefit costs of 4 firefighter positions. These average costs exclude all overtime costs, and they also exclude the chief, deputy chief, and fire marshal positions. These additional hires were in 1996 these additional hires increased the capacity to handle simultaneous EMS calls during high on-call demand periods. The current rate structure that we have in our EMS rates was implemented during the 2011 to 2012 biennium. And it's a flat rate structure that has the same rate for each customer class, so single family, multifamily, that sort of thing. In terms of our primary driver for our emergency medical service rates, it's really just our COLA, or cost of living adjustments. The metric that Eastside Fire and Rescue, which is now where our firefighter staff lies, that were formerly Mercer Island Fire staff as of January 1, 2024, and the same metric that the city follows is a CPIW for Seattle, Tacoma, Bellevue area, specifically the first half measurement. As a reminder, that COLA for 2024 that was applied in 2024 was 6%. So with that in mind, the staff recommendation for the EMS utility rate is an increase of 5.81% over our 2024 rates. What this looks like in terms of actual dollar impact is a 67-cent increase every other month. So it's a little bit less than 34 cents a month. And you can see how it's broken down by kind of what we would call our average customer class. Single family and multifamily are dominant kind of players in the customer class department. So with that, I will open the floor to any questions and discussion with the board.
Any board members with any questions?
This is Todd. Yeah, what is there a typical
Todd,
average rate?
hang on, Todd, hang on. Lisa had her hand up first. So we're gonna follow parliamentary procedure here.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Meredith.
I was waiting because you said Lisa, but.
Oh, did I? No, I was saying, I'm sorry, Lair. Member Lair.
Yeah, Lisa, Lair, it's all the same. This is kind of a quick background question for Jason, maybe Jake. So in 10, 12 years ago, the council changed how they look at this by doing a flat rate for each class instead of different rates for classes based on actual use. Do you know if there's any Has the council had any interest in going back and evaluating that structure for rates and seeing what they think of it?
I think I can actually take this one, board member Lair. It wasn't necessarily a voluntary implementation of the flat rate structure. It was due in part to a basic life service ambulance transport fee that was implemented as part of the 2011-2012 biennial budget process to balance the budget that council approved. Because of that, due to Washington state law, that action unintentionally replaced the long-standing variable EMS rate structure that was in place from 1996 up until that point. And the city was required to switch this flat rate structure per customer class.
So was it that if you adopted whatever this ambulance rate charge was, you had to change the structure? I mean, if it was unintentional, that's my question about whether anybody has gone back to look at whether this is the best way to fund it.
So I think it's unintentional in that it can't be reversed. So because of this BLS transport fee that is still in place currently, and earns revenue for the city, the city is no longer able to revert to that variable rate structure as long as that BLS transport fee stays in place. I don't know if it's been deliberated. That is food for thought, though.
Ben, just to make sure we're understanding when you say adopted, I mean, I thought that was statutory, no? Like Olympia.
That is a good question, Chair. I will, if any other city staff can chime in. I'm not exactly sure why that BLS fee was implemented, but I see Luan Tuttle jumping on, so I'll pass it to our Deputy Finance Director, Luan Tuttle.
Hi, Luan Tuttle, your Deputy Finance Director. The statutory rules are that if you implemented an ambulance transport fee, so this BLS fee, then you had to revert your EMS to a flat rate and couldn't do the variable rate. So the only way that we could return.
Ms. Tuttle, can you maybe sit closer to your mic or something? You're very, very faint.
Sorry, is that better?
A little, yeah.
Yeah, Tim,
Yeah,
I'm pretty good on hearing her, so I don't know if it's her or if it's your system.
Okay, so the only way we could revert to variable rate is if we eliminated the ambulance transport fee that we are collecting. So as long as we have that transport fee in place, which we still do, we cannot revert to the variable rate EMS. We have to stay with the flat rate. And that's statutory, yes, state law.
Thank you.
And is the ambulatory fee something that each household pays? Is that, I mean, is it a fee on all of us? Is it, or as opposed to a fee, who pays the fee?
It's a fee for service. So if you are transported via ambulance, your insurance is billed.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Todd, you were next.
Thank you. I believe it was Ben, is that correct? Who was presenting. Thank you for sharing. Curious, how does this year's recommended COLA compare to prior year? Do we have any of that data? And if so, maybe I missed it, but just curious. Thank you.
Yeah, no, great question, Board Member White. Thank you. So this COLA, or the 6% COLA that we saw applied to 2024 rates, was atypical. I think we did have a period of historically high COLAs starting, I believe, in 2022, where we peaked at 8.6%. Staff, or I can pull together a table and share that after the utility board meeting and follow up if that's of interest to the board. That should be no problem. Some insight for 2025 rates, what you can expect to see next year. We get that COLA percentage in about July of the current year to be applied to the next fiscal year. That was 4.2% in 2024. That will be applied to 2025 wages, which will then go back to recoup next time we go to this rate setting process for EMS utility.
Can I
Thank
just
you.
jump in and say that I checked last year's stuff and the increases last year, and I don't know if it was directly correlates to COLA, but the increases last year were 10.01%. So I'm not sure if last year's COLA was close to that or it was much higher.
Yes. So last year's COLA was a portion of two things. Great question, Board Member Lair. Thank you. There was an 8.6% COLA, as I mentioned, which was our historically the highest COLA we've seen since I think the 1980s. On top of that, there was a COLA applied to current firefighting staff that were still Mercer Island staff at that point in time, due to impact bargaining with Eastside Fire and Rescue. So As a result of that impact bargaining, there was an additional COLA percentage applied to those current or those past Mercer Island staff. And that's why we saw kind of an extra or an atypically high rate increase last year.
George, you've had your hand raised patiently, sir. Your turn. You're muted, George. George, you're muted.
There we go.
There we go.
All right, kind of a knit and grit on the COLA. When you say it's over a 6-month period, is that an average of January through June or a median, or how is it actually calculated?
So I do believe is an average. It's a statistic published by the consumer. Get the exact name before I get that wrong. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. So they publish a percentage every other month currently, and then for the percentage that comes in February, April, and June, we take an average, and that's our first 0.5%.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no other hands raised, I do have a question. This is a little less formal set of data as we've seen than before. I'm curious, is this a mid-biennium adjustment to what we did previously, or is this for the next biennium?
So this is for 2025. I think, so the EMS is a little bit different because it is really driven year to year. I think for our utilities, you may be more, or for our water, sewer, and stormwater utilities, you may be more used to seeing kind of a 2-year look. And that follows the way we set our budget, as we do it per biennium. The EMS utility really is just on a year-to-year basis because it's based on a single percentage CPI increase in a single year. So we only do 1 year set at a time for the EMS utility rate. We only look at 1 year.
Okay. Other questions? Any other discussion? If not, I heard some requests for some data and a suggestion that data might be available. We want to wait for that and see it at our next board meeting, or do people feel able to proceed right now? I'll open it up for discussion if someone wants to put a motion on the table either way. Meredith.
Yeah, I mean, I would be comfortable voting on this now, and I could move that we adopt these rates. On the other hand, I don't want to rush if there's somebody who's not comfortable voting on it now. I'm not sure if that's a motion or not.
The sentiment is what it is.
It's a sentiment. That's exactly right.
Okay, I'm not sure I heard a motion there, but why don't we treat that as a motion to approve right now? Is that a friendly characterization, Meredith? Is there a second for that motion?
I'll second it.
Okay. Moved and seconded. Discussion.
Could I make a statement, please?
Please.
Yeah, I think it's helpful in these sort of conversations to have that historical data as a means of reference. And so my preference would be to bring historical data into all of these rate discussions and have that available for review either before the meeting or during the meeting. And I think that helps everyone have confidence in terms of the context of approving rate changes. So thank you very much.
Further discussion. I think your chair, I will say I'm actually inclined to agree with Todd on this one, but that's just my personal opinion. Any other discussion?
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in. I don't have any objection to waiting, obviously, and I actually pulled out my old-fashioned paperwork from a year ago and looked at some of this stuff from prior years, which is maybe something Todd wouldn't have had access to as well. So,
Yeah, this is George. I'm okay with waiting as well.
Okay. So I think parliamentarily, if that's a verb, if that's an adverb, we would vote on the motion pending and then perhaps make a motion to defer. Does that make sense to people?
Mm-hmm.
yeah, or I can withdraw it if you want.
Okay. Why, if the proponent is willing to withdraw the motion?
Why don't I withdraw the motion?
Okay, the motion is withdrawn. Is there an alternative motion for the table? Looking at you, Todd.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to bring in that historical data. open to timeframes. I don't know, I'm just sort of speaking out loud here, but the last 5 years or something that gives context, I think would provide the team with a more informed decision. So that's my motion. Thank you.
Second,
Second.
any further discussion? If not, I'll call the question on that motion to defer pending receipt of some further data. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Meredith, I didn't see how you voted.
Oh, I'm sorry, I said aye. I
Very
was
good.
drowned out.
There you go. Unanimous. Okay, thank you. Which brings us to item 3, the water rate discussion.
Thank you, Chair O'Connell. At this point, I will introduce, or I'll go ahead and hand the floor to Angie and Chase from FCS, and they can walk you through the presentation.
Excellent. Thank you. And good evening, utility board members. Hopefully you can see my screen here. Can you go ahead and see that? Wonderful.
Yes, we can.
Well, again, good evening. My name is Angie Sanchez Bernache, and I'm here with Chase Bazette, project consultant, and we're with FCS company. Over the last couple of months, we have been working with the city to conduct a water, sewer, and stormwater rate update. And we have had the privilege really of being able to assist the city with these rate updates since 2020. And so this iteration will be our third cycle to assist the city again with those updates. Just as a little bit of background, the rate studies do provide not only a 2-year look ahead, but also, a rolling 5 to 6 year time period look ahead, so that the city has the ability to be proactive in terms of planning for their utilities, seeing if there's any bumps in the road. And these particular updates are really there to recalibrate revenues and expenses, and again, gives the city and board the opportunity to evaluate if the plan, as we thought it would be in the future, can hold, or if there's some changes that would require some type of rate adjustment to the rate path that we thought we were on. And so it's a really great tool to be able to proactively plan for the utilities. This evening, what we'd like to do is discuss a quick overview of the rate setting process, just to get everybody on the same page, present some of the key data inputs and assumptions, and then also provide some of the preliminary initial findings for each of the utilities in terms of this update. And then obviously want to leave time in terms of the end for questions and discussion. I'm going to turn it over really quickly to Jason before we jump into the financials and assumptions on the financial side, just to give a quick discussion in terms of the critical capital work ahead and, really what is underlying some of the key drivers of the particular utility rate updates.
Thank you, Angie. So as the utility board knows, we've had numerous conversations at the board level and at the council level regarding significant reinvestment needs on the utility side for the capital program. As you can see, the total 2025-2026 preliminary budget are just north of 72.2 million, and 56.6 are tied to the utility funds. In particular, there is a significant reinvestment in the next programmatic years on the water distribution system. As the board knows, the majority of our water infrastructure was constructed in the late 50s and early 60s, with the expected useful life of 50 to 75 years, depending on age and condition and type of material. Those replacements for our water infrastructure are categorized into a number of different components, including age of pipe, type of pipe, overall condition, so like the history of the break, water quality components, as well as coordination with other capital projects such as street projects, sewer projects, stormwater projects. Those factors are all utilized to basically create a scoring matrix to prioritize our reinvestment needs within our water utility in particular. The board may recall that during the last budget cycle, we actually added a new programmatic element to the capital program, which includes the replacement of the asbestos cement with the AC pipe, the remaining AC pipe within our distribution system. This pipe has been deteriorating at a very high rate over the last few years, and usually with those type of breaks, those aren't easy band repair breaks. Those are catastrophic breaks, meaning actually full segments of pipe have to be replaced to replace and fix those water main breaks. I will say, and Alan's on the call, he's gonna cringe when I say this, but it's the fact the reality of the situation is Mercer Island does see a significantly higher frequency of main breaks compared to other jurisdictions and utilities around the region. Part of that's tied to the age and condition of the infrastructure, part of it's tied to the topography, and just the overall weather changes that take place in the fall and winter months and spring months with the freeze thaw cycle. So with that, obviously, it drives the need for reinvestment up, and it is, as you'll see in the capital program, it is there are quite a few expenses on the water side. Our water reinvestment is more than just pipe replacement, though. As you've seen throughout the course of the last few years, we prioritized improvements at our reservoir facility with relining the tanks, both the interior and the exterior, adding a booster chlorination station. And you may recall that we're currently in the process of replacing our 5 water pumps that provide water to the island. Just shows the sort of the variety, the breadth of the type of projects that we have prioritized. Additionally, a piece of that puzzle was adding a new program for our PRV replacements. PRVs are pressure reducing valves. There's 80 plus, 83, I think, throughout the distribution system. We are prioritizing the top 20 or most critical PRV stations within our reinvestment needs. So again, our water system replacement has broadened over the last few years to include more than just water pipe replacement projects. Unfortunately, our infrastructure is all coming of age at the same time, and so time is of the essence with the replacement of our water infrastructure. On the sewer side, we face very similar challenges. We have a unique sewer system in the fact that it's mostly gravity fed down to the lake's edge, and then it's pumped through a lake line around the island into the King County system. That system has a combination of 17 pump stations, which again, installed in the late 50s and 60s that are nearing the end of the useful life. But they are critical pieces of infrastructure that help convey our sewage off the island and to a treatment facility. Unfortunately, given the complexity associated with where those pump stations are located, as many of you know, they're at or near the shoreline, often within easement areas, and they are responsible for a very, very important job to make sure that sewage gets off the island. So none of that is quick and easy work and cheap work, unfortunately. And so those are obviously some pretty big factors in contributing to our overall capital program. There's lots I can say on the capital reinvestment side. I'm happy to talk about it further, but I'll pause there. I'll pass it back to Angie and Chase to carry on the presentation. But those are some of the key factors driving the critical capital work on our future.
Thank you, Jason. And you'll see some more of those particular capital plans for each of the utilities as we charge ahead on the presentation. So again, just to provide a quick overview in terms of what we'll be seeing in the next several slides. To recap in terms of the rate study elements, the overall objective of the particular rate studies is to evaluate the sufficiency of each of the utilities independently. So we always say on a standalone basis. So essentially the revenues coming in for each utility should be covering the overall obligations of that particular utility. And so that's really what we're focused on in terms of when we're evaluating each of those utilities independently. As you can see from the graphic to the side there, we are looking at direct costs such as operating costs, debt service costs, capital improvement costs, but also keeping our eye on those indirect costs such as maintaining and meeting our fiscal policies, so reserve levels and various different policies that the city has in terms of how they manage and govern themselves. Each of those particular elements feed into what we then deem and define as a revenue requirement for each utility. And so again, each of those pieces is really defining what our overall revenues needs to be supporting on an annual ongoing basis. When we look at that, again, our overall goal is to try to balance the financial needs of each of the utilities with minimizing customer impacts. And again, that's why we're looking at that multi-year rate plan with although we're looking at that 5-year to 6-year rate plan, our focus is going to be on that 2025 to 2026 biennial period. And so that's what you'll see as the focus as well. When we begin thinking about each of the utilities specifically, there's some broad general assumptions that kind of are applicable to each of the utilities. And then we'll start looking at each of the particular utilities independently in terms of their various independent assumptions. When we look at just kind of some of the more broad assumptions, our forecast basis, again, is the 2025 to 2030 time period, with a specific emphasis, again, on the 25 to 26 time period in terms of rate setting. We are using the 24 through 26 budget as a baseline. So when we look at these particular costs, we're looking at these budget specific city provided budgets, but then also jumping off using various different escalation factors to get to our 2030 time period. When we think about operating reserve targets, each of the utilities has different reserve targets ranging from 30 to 90 days in terms of being able to cover a certain amount of days operating expenses. And the difference comes from, let's say, for example, the water utility would have a 90-day operating expense just due to the revenue volatility that could happen with weather conditions. And so again, something that's more stable will have more of a 30-day operating reserve target. In terms of customer growth, when we're looking at revenue coming in the door, we are conservatively projecting no growth in terms of these particular financial plans that you'll see before you this evening. Again, going back to when we're jumping off of the 2025-26 budgets that we have to use, we are using various line item escalation factors to get to our future time period, looking at in the range of 3.5 to 6% for various different city costs, such as labor, such as various, CPI adjustment factors or engineering news record construction type costs. Those are probably more in the, the higher ranges. Again, the construction costs at about 4% per year, benefits at about 6% per year, but in general, you're hovering around the 3.5% for miscellaneous expenses, other expenses, and labor. Where there are some differences is the Seattle Public Utilities water costs. We're looking at about a 5% increase per year in those particular costs. And we actually do have actual King County Metro sewer treatment expenses. They have a projection from 2025 to 2034 of what they anticipate those particular rate increases to be, which actually are hovering at 5.75 for 2025, but the rest of those years are hovering between 7 to 9.25%. So pretty significant increases that really our utility has no control over. It's just something that we ultimately have to pay and pass on to our ratepayers. In terms of the existing debt service, again, this is just strictly current debt that you're paying today. The water utility has about $300,000 annually, sewer utility about $1 million annually, and the stormwater utility has no debt associated with it at this time. And then the capital plans, as you'll see in the future slides that we have for you, are a combination of the 2024 budget as well as working with staff to look out in terms of the future time period, 25 to 2030, in terms of what those particular capital obligations may look like in the future. So now we're going to start specifically talking about each of the utilities independently. And so we'll go with the water utility first. To provide some type of background, we wanted to, again, recap a little bit in terms of not only what we were seeing last time, but also what you might be seeing in terms of some of the changes that you're going to be seeing with the numbers that we'll be presenting. So in terms of the operating and maintenance expenses, really great thing that was what happened in terms of the water utility, as the city was able to secure a low interest loan for the booster chlorination system at a pretty fantastic interest rate at 0.89%. That's pretty unheard of for 20 years. And so that was great news, as the prior rate study had actually projected about a 5% interest rate. So that really does help in terms of how we're able to work the plan and see what we can do with the plan that we thought was before us. The city, however, is in the process of securing additional long-term general obligation debt for this particular utility, again, due to the capital needs that are coming up. There are also some new operating costs in terms of the new compensation plan that was implemented in 2024. So we have some new salary schedules and classification adjustments that have been included in the costs that you see before you for that budget 25-26 time period. And you can see those percentages there. The capital costs, the previous study had estimated about $75 million, and you all are probably hearing inflationary costs. We talk with a lot of our different clients. They're feeling the pressures of inflationary costs, in particular for the capital bids that they're getting in terms of the current day. And so costs are just really outpacing what some plans had anticipated. And so last time was about 75 million. You'll see it has increased a bit when we slip to the next slide. And we had assumed about 33 million in debt last time. So there was still some combination of, yes, you have some significant critical capital that we needed to have, and as well as that being financed through debt. What the rate plan last time had said, again, taking a peek on that next biennial and 2 to 4 year time period, is that we were looking at having about 8% increases at that particular time. So again, what we do with these particular rate updates is say, okay, well, that was the plan. Now that we're going to recalibrate our revenue and expenses and our capital, Are we going to be able to hold to that plan, or can we do something different? So in terms of our operating forecast, what you can see here, again, 2024 through 2030, with the focus being the 25-26. If we look at our bars as those expenses, so our gray bars are operating and maintenance expenses. And again, it does blip up a little bit in 2025 due to those salary increases and classifications that we had previously noted. Our SPU water purchases, again, in that kind of blue aqua color there, are about $2.2 to $2.8 million. And again, that's what you're seeing there is a 5% increase per year that we're anticipating based on kind of historical and what's been happening. And again, that little sliver really in comparison to the other costs is your existing debt service that you have for the water utility. When we look at our overall capital plan for the time period, 2024 to 2030 capital plan, again, we're going to focus here.
I've lost audio.
Excuse me?
I've lost the audio.
Someone's lost audio. Can anybody else hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah,
I can
It's
hear you
Todd.
just
I can hear
fine.
you.
Would you like me to continue? Are we okay?
I hear you now.
Okay, great.
perfect.
So, excuse me. In terms of our overall capital needs for the 2024-2030 for the water utility, you can see here, as capital does, it ebbs and flows. For the gray bars are the city CIP, and in total, this particular time period is about 104.8 million. So in comparison, what we had just talked about, the prior study was about 75 million. So again, due to inflation and some various other changes that have happened for the water utility, that has increased to about 104. What you will notice that was not included in the prior study is the city transmission line replacement. And we kind of highlight that in that blue because really the peak period there is going to be 2027. But again, trying to determine how do we fund that particular project, again, looking out in terms of the future. And so we had about 28 million in the 2024 budgeted for capital costs. We have about 20.7 million for the city transmission line replacement. Again, as you can see, when that particular replacement line is going to take place or scheduled to take place in terms of the best planning that we have today or best information that we have today, with the ongoing other city capital needs about 56.1 million. So again, you can kind of see we peaked in 24, kind of go down, but also have some unanticipated capital costs that we have in 25-26. And then again, it kind of peaks in 2027. When we look at how do we fund these particular capital needs, if we wanted to move forward with this capital program and execute it as scheduled, what we're looking at is, again, the current 2024 debt issuance that we're looking at is about 28 million for the water utility. There are some planned, again, if we continue on this particular path, 2027 to 2030 debt issuances. These will be, we will come back and reevaluate those as the next kind of cycle, but we just wanted to, again, take a peek in the future to see, will we still need additional debt for the water utility? It does look like we would potentially need additional debt. And so when we look at it in total, what you're looking at is about 62% or 65 billion financed with debt service and about 40 million and 38% with cash. So you still are funding with cash. We're just, not doing as much as cash as we are with debt. Again, we're trying to kind of catch up in terms of some of that deferred maintenance. In terms of the water revenue requirement, and when we put everything together to say, okay, so the bars are our expenses and these lines are our existing revenue. So the solid line is the existing revenue. The dotted line is with our rate adjustments. What does this look like? So when we look at our rate setting period, again, looking at these bars here, it does look like our ongoing revenue is meeting our operating costs, kind of the burnt orange here down below. So we're meeting operating costs. What's happening is that we're starting to reduce the amount of capital capacity that we have. So where our revenue is not able to meet as much capital as we need it to meet in terms of cash funding. And so in order to resolve that issue, if we did nothing with rates, you can see by 2027, we're no longer able to meet potentially a new debt service that we may need in that 2027 time period. And the deficiency of the gap grows in terms of the time period that we have. What we like to look at is how do we phase rates in over time in order to minimize the impact to our customers, knowing what we may have in terms of the future. And so in order to, again, increase to the capital capacity that we have in our revenue from rates, in order to meet those capital needs, what we're looking at is we are able to maintain that 8% annual rate plan that we had anticipated in the future. There's a couple good things, even though the 8% might seem overly burdensome. That was what we had anticipated that path would be, even at the last rate study. But there were some pretty good things that actually happened. As we noted, we got a low interest loan that would had a very favorable interest rate, which was wonderful for the city to secure, which allowed us to then add in that city transmission line replacement without having to change the rate path. So even though there's an 8% increase, we were actually able to do a little bit more capital and anticipated capital for that city transmission line replacement because of the fact that there was some benefit of the savings from that overall low interest loan that we were able to secure. And so overall, in general, we are able to maintain the 8% annual rate plan for the water utility that we had anticipated last time, even though some things changed within those assumptions. What does that look like in terms of the single family bill? What we have at the very top is the bi-monthly bill, and then we have the monthly bill, depending on how you like to look at your various different impacts. And so what we can see here is for the 2025-26 time period that we have blocked off in blue here, the bi-monthly rate increase of an 8% would be about $11 to $12 on an increase for that rate, or about 5.69 to 6.17 monthly for the water utility, again, maintaining that 8% increase per year that we had anticipated. Really the key drivers being that there are some near-term capital investment needs. Is that city transmission line replacement opportunity there, and again, the various different associated debt repayments that we may need to make simply because, again, we have this capital need in order to fund for the water utility. Moving on to the sewer revenue requirement. So the format will be very similar to the water we just went through.
And Angie, can I stop you?
Yeah.
It strikes me that it might be appropriate to allow the board to ask questions about water before we move on to sewer. Sure. So I guess I'd like to open it up for questions from members of the board. Todd, I see your hand is raised.
Thank you. Is it Angie? Did I get your name
Yes.
correctly? A very nice presentation. Thank you for going through that. I don't know if you were on the call previously, but I made a motion for some historical data to help us give context to these planned rate increases. So I would, I guess, issue the same motion here, number one. And then I'm just curious, the 8% per year, not having the historical data, is that what we've been utilizing for the last several years as an 8% increase? Thank you.
Yes, I believe there was an 8% increase for the last biennial period. And then when we had looked at that kind of rolling forecast in the future, we had anticipated that we would need recurring 8% increases for the next few years.
And Meredith, before we go to you, I'm going to serve as your chair and parliamentarian. Todd, you mentioned making a motion. I don't know that I heard you actually make a motion, but I would ask that you defer that until we have kind of a general discussion, if that's acceptable to you.
Certainly. I wanted to just make a generalized request for historical data for all of the different rates that we're talking about. Thank you.
I promise you I will come back to you after you've had a chance to discussion.
Could I make a compliment real quick? I want to compliment the team. I think it was Jason and Elaine who set up the tour in July to go around the island and look at all the infrastructure. That was super helpful, very informative. I learned an awful lot, so thanks for doing that.
Great. Meredith, your hand is raised.
Yeah, a couple of things. There's a little bit of the history of the rates in our item 3 in the table 5, because it's got the 2020 rate update and the 21-22 rate updates. And it was 6.5, 5.25. And then last year is the first year, I think, we started talking about 8% across the board. Also in the, I appreciate, well, first of all, really a very nice presentation, Angie, so thank you. And I appreciate you including both the bi-monthly and the monthly here in your slide, because I noticed in table 3 on our materials for the sewer and the water and the stormwater stuff, they gave it was presented as a monthly instead of bi-monthly. In prior years, we've had bi-monthly, and our bills are bi-monthly. So I actually personally prefer bi-monthly because that's both how I see it in our bill and how people who I talk to in the world see it. My question is a couple of detailed questions. One might be, Jason, I know we're doing the top 20 PRVs, and I'm curious first how many we got through this year. And my other question is both the water utility and I think it's the stormwater utility reference a new FTE, and it wasn't clear to me whether that was one person for both the stormwater and the water, or whether each one of those utilities has a whole new FTE, or what?
So good questions. So to the first question, so of the 83 or so PRVs, we are prioritizing the first 20, and we are batching those. So we've done design. We're batching them sort of groups of 5 in essence, and so we're designing the first 5. We're actually going to design the second 5 and then construct the first set together for better. The hope is that we can get better bids by grouping a larger body of work together that's similar. So that's part 1. Part 2, I'm going to ask Ben to jump on, or Lawan, to talk about the staffing positions. And on the stormwater side, I believe it is the stormwater quality tech that is the new position. And I can't see Ben on the screen. Give me a second. Angie, can you maybe stop just screen sharing for just a second, just so I can see faces?
Let's see if I can get my mouse to cooperate with me.
Yeah, Jason, I was curious while you were getting to them. I mean, you showed us in the tour at least one of the PRVs being changed. So I didn't know, was there just one that was done this summer, or
Oh. Good. Alan's on the phone, or Alan's on the call here. He can speak to that as well. I will say that on the PRV side, oftentimes with those water system improvement projects that we have, if there's a PRV associated to that body of work, then we will include that PRV replacement as part of that water system improvement project. So it's predominantly a water replacement project, but sometimes it does include other infrastructure such as PRVs, hydrants, other elements. I'm assuming that the PRV you saw was actually tied to a water system improvement project that was completed this year. And Alan, can you confirm that?
Yeah, so Meredith, when we went and looked at the 2 PRVs, the old one versus the new one was part of the water system improvement project that was tied in. The old one we looked at is actually part of the first 4 that are being under construction right now. That one is actually under construction for being replaced. So we're in construction for the first 4, and we're in design for the next 5 right now.
Great, thank you.
As far as the staffing
83.
component.
Sorry, 83 PRVs, correct, Alan?
Yes, about 83.
As far as the staffing component, board member Lair, so we made a point to call out, it's technically a 0.25 FTE increase in each utility. And it is a support services tech. So it's a position that would work in each utility, and it's just funded equally through each utility. Stormwater specifically, if we can jump ahead just a little bit, I know we just touched on water, but to tackle it now. So there's 2 things affecting all utilities, which is that support services tech. So that's water, sewer, and storm. A portion is funding that position. And then there is a salary schedule implementation that Angie mentioned. So that comes up in each utility as well. That mostly affects our non-represented staff, so our managerial staff in the utilities. But it was an increase to salary and wages, and we wanted to point that out. As far as stormwater goes, there is a more significant staffing increase in there. It's not wholly tied to an FTE, so it's not a single position or a single person, but it was kind of reclassing where employees charge their codes. We were not capturing a lot of the time and staff resources being spent on stormwater related work. And so that was a big point in this going into the 25-26 biennium that we kind of reclassed or reallocated some of our employee cost centers. And so the stormwater utility shows a larger increase than the others.
Thank you.
I'll add to that, Ben, just to further clarify. So in particular, like our managers, Alan's on the call now. Alan oversees the water and the sewer side of the house. And so his time is split depending on a ratio of which the bulk of his time and work is spent. So it's charged correctly to that utility. Brian Harvickson, our right away and stormwater manager, does the same thing. So what Ben's talking about is we do a sort of a true up exercise every 2 years as part of the budget process to make sure staff are allocated correctly.
Other questions? Craig? I saw your go up and down.
Thank you. You refer to in the staff report of a smoothed rate model. I was just curious for newbies like me, what exactly does that refer to?
And do you want to take that or do you want me to take that?
I can take that one. So it really just speaks to the idea that we're spreading these rates out equally across the entire 6-year look of these rate setting kind of processes, because the water, sewer, and stormwater utilities follow our CIP plan. It's a period of 6 years. And it's really, instead of saying, because most of our CIP expenditures are higher in the first 2 years, instead of upping the rates in those first 2 years to cover just those 2 years, we really try to take a holistic approach to providing enough adequate funding to meet our fiscal reserve policies and our funding targets. So we apply an 8% rate across the whole period to keep the utility whole, instead of kind of, I guess, band-aiding on a year-to-year basis.
Yeah. Thank you.
Meredith, I'll get to you, but I have a question, and I'd just like to give everyone one shot before we go on for repeats. I'm not sure to whom this is addressed best, Ben or Jason. I'm racking my brain to recall any discussion about the city transmission line, and that's a pretty big chunk of change within a couple of years. Could you perhaps discuss that with us?
I was wondering if anyone was going to ask me about that, because I forgot to mention.
I wasn't going to let you get away.
Well,
I'm surprised that
my
Angie
question as
didn't.
well.
Sorry, we've talked about this a handful of times, and it was my full intention to talk about the transmission line as a new proposed project. Actually, at the October 1st City Council meeting, we will be presenting this proposed project as part of the next capital program on the water utility side. This is directly tied to the recent water emergency that the city just went through with the Seattle Public Utilities transmission line. So that transmission line is, as we've spoken about before, is located that is inaccessible, steep slope, surrounded by homes, power lines overhead, high pressure gas line, multiple gas lines right next to it. And so this proposed project is to actually look at an alternative new transmission line. Currently, that transmission line is owned and operated by Seattle Public Utilities, paid for by the lion's share of Mercer ratepayers. So this project would actually look at relocating that transmission line from the boat launch on East Mercer Way to the reservoir tank facilities. So we're a little bit in front of this discussion tonight, is a little bit in front of that discussion. It was originally intended to go at the last council meeting, but the city's comprehensive plan update took over that meeting. If anybody was watching the council meeting, or as Councilmember Jacobson can attest, it was a lengthy conversation last Tuesday, and so this was moved to the first meeting in October. So this is a new proposed project to relocate that line and actually have the city take over ownership, operation, and maintenance of that pipeline.
Thank you. No, once you put it in context, Jason, yes, we have discussed. That's essentially the replacement for the line, the SBU line that broke and had us all in yet another water emergency earlier this year. So, thank you. That does help. Meredith.
Yeah, actually, that was exactly my question about what the city transmission line project was. But I had a quick question for Jason, which is, now that we've got the admittedly smaller liner in, how are we doing?
Oh, great question. We are back to normal operations as we expected or as we predicted. So things are working out well for now. Again, it's a liner solution. So this project is to actually look at replacing that pipe and looking at a different route to the reservoir facility. But the liner and our operations are back to normal, which is great news for us in terms of the city transmission line.
Very good. Others? Councilmember Jacobson, your hand is raised. Yes, sir. You're muted.
I
There we go.
just got that thought. When we were discussing at the city council meeting, and I'm not sure it was the last one of the more recent ones, about the idea of getting some, bonding some of these water improvements. One of the concepts that was discussed was that, and this may relate to smooth rates to some degree, was that the concept that was discussed was generational equity, so that people who benefit from the replaced water, replaced transmission facilities 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now aren't free riders. And am I correctly summarizing that discussion, Jason?
Yes, you are. That's why we have the debt issuance scheduled the way it is, or projected to be scheduled the way it is. So that transmission line is the bulk of the construction is we've timed it with the debt issuance and projected
Yeah.
debt issuance in 2027, so that we can catch that project as part of that next issuance. So yes.
So that may or may not be of interest to the board. Right? That was one thing that was presented to the city council, and one thing that the city council approved of.
And I'll say thank you, Councilman, because that certainly has been something I've also been a big proponent of, as Jason knows. And so thank you very much for moving forward with that. I have another question, unless any other member of the board has a question. Seeing none. And I don't know, again, if this is a question for Jason or for Ben. The 28 million that is anticipated in debt financing for 2024, if I caught that number off of the one of Angie's slides, I assume that funding is spread out over the 3 years that's encompassed in that cycle, because I saw another 30 some odd million in 2027. Is that a fair assumption or not?
If I understand your question correctly, Chair O'Connell, you're asking if the debt issuance that we are currently seeking, so I think October is when the city's looking to procure that, if that is going to cover the entirety, or could you repeat your question, please?
Sure. I mean, I saw in Angie's slide that there's a 28 million debt issuance in 2024. There's another, was it 33 million anticipated in 2027? I'm assuming that the 28 million is not all spent in calendar year 2024. Is that funding our capital improvements over the 3 years until the next, or is it being spent over a longer time period than that? Could you explain that?
Matt, do you want to take this one? I'll invite our
Sure,
finance
I'd be
director.
happy to. Thank you, Ben. This is Matt Mornick, your finance director. Thank you
you.
for the question, Chair O'Connell. We have been, the short answer is you are correct. That is a correct assumption. Just based on IRS tax laws at the federal level, when dealing with tax-free limited tax general obligation bonds, we have to spend 85% of the bond proceeds from day of receipt within 3 years. And so in November 2023, the city council adopted a ordinance establishing essentially declaring the intent to reimburse ourselves on costs that have already been incurred. Because as you can imagine, when we're dealing with underground utility construction projects, project timelines are very susceptible to being extended just by the necessity and complexity of the work. And so we've given ourselves the utmost flexibility we legally can to make sure that we spend down the $28 million in bonds that we look to sell and get the first week of November of this year, so that we abide by that tax obligation.
And kind of a follow-up to that. So $28 million in debt obligations paid out over 20 years, is it?
20 years. Yeah,
20 years.
we thought it was much more prudent in terms of the additional interest we would have had to pay if we had done a 25-year issuance. To commit to a 20-year issuance, we would have saved about $4.5 million by paying it down over a shorter period, a debt service cycle.
And so when we factor in the interest and paying that out over, paying them off over 20 years, what is it possible to say that produces a debt service charge for the utility? What would that work out to? 1 million, 2 million a
An
year?
average annual debt service resulting from the $28 million issuance is just over $2 million a year for 20 years, for a total debt service of $40.3 million.
Thank you. Any other member of the board have any further questions? I'm not hearing any. Since the water was a separate line item on the agenda, I would like to take a motion now if there is an appetite of the board to do it. Todd, I promised you that I would recognize you to make your motion if you are so inclined.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'd like to formally make a motion to have at least 5-year look back on historical data for proposed rate increases for all utilities. Thank you.
Is there a second for that?
I just would like to clarify, Council Chair O'Connell, the memo that went out to the utility board included a look back to 2020 on the historical rate. So is the question to go back to 2019 and provide the precise adopted rates?
Matt, I'm looking at the packet. Was there something that you're referring to that's not? Because maybe I'm seeing it.
Yeah, Matt, I printed out everything. I don't see anything that goes back to 2020 are we on water?
On table 5, we illustrated what the previous rate models had presented. It doesn't.
Can you direct us to that, Matt? Where
Table
is
5, page 4
right.
of the memo.
The water memo.
Member Lair pointed it out earlier. So is just for the sake of clarification, we just want to make sure that we get the utility board precisely what you need. Can we just add a little bit more specificity for what you're looking for in the motion?
I heard the motion was for 5 years, and I'm looking at table 5 right now, and I see it goes back to 2023.
Right, but if you look at the entries, it says 2020 rate update and then 2021, 2022 rate update. I think that's the source of his question.
So just as some clarification, board, I think I've confused Matt with my titling scheme here. So I wrote these memos, I put that table in. So that 2020 rate update is the proposed rates for 23-24. The rates that were actually applied in 23-24 were your 2021, 2022. So that 5.25%, or excuse me, it was the 2023-2024 rate updates. So we had 8% for 2023, 8% for 2024. The extra columns, so if we look at row 3, 2023 to 2024 rate update, we see it going out to 2028. So these are just, it's supposed to be a look back at the previous plans that we've submitted to the utility board. Typically what happens, or the mechanics of these rate updates, is that we submit a 6-year plan for a new biennium. So right now we're in our 2025-2026 rate proposal update. That last line in that table 5. We're showing is an 8% smooth rate model over the 6-year period. What typically happens is that in 2 years, at the start of the next biennium, given there's no significant change during the mid-biennial budget process, we come with a new rate proposal. So typically we apply the same rate for about a 2-year period throughout the biennium. And then we do kind of usually come back with a changed rate. This is, I think, the first rate model in a while that we've come back with the exact same rate proposal for water specifically. So it was 8% for 2023 and 2024. It was 5.25% for 2022 and 2021. And then it was that 6.5% for 2020 and 2019. So
I think we've kind of jumped ahead of ourselves here. the city's got no one to blame but itself because you sent me to this darn parliamentary procedure training. And so I'm trying to be a good parliamentarian. I had a motion on the table. I don't know that I heard a second for it. And the motion, as I heard it, was for additional historical data. Is there a second for that motion? I'm not hearing a second. So if I don't hear a second, the motion dies for want of a second.
Well, I'll second it so we can discuss it.
Okay, very good. The motion's been made and seconded. Is there discussion? Do we have
Right.
enough historical data, or do we need more? Okay.
Right, and so if I'm understanding this table 5 correctly, in 2020, you did a rate update. You did it for 5 years or 6 years. And at that time, in 2020, you thought the 5-year plan was going to be a 6.5% plan for the next 5 or 6 years. I guess 6 if you're doing bienniums. 2021, it was 5.25% for the next X number of years. 2023, it was 8%. Now we're looking at another 8%. Am I reading this correctly now?
Yes, that is the correct way to read it.
Yeah, and then Todd, I don't know if that helps you or not. And that's why, I mean, I seconded it just so we can talk about it.
Yeah, if I have the floor, if this Todd, thank you. If the data is available, I guess I wasn't clear, but if the links aren't working on my computer right now for some reason. But if the board is satisfied that we have that historical look back, then I'm more than happy to withdraw the motion if we have that data available.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind having historical data on the bi-monthly increases that we've asked people to incur for the last several years and what we're asking going forward. I mean, what's on this table 3 is the monthly, not the bi-monthly. When I looked at last year's tables, they were in a bi-monthly format. So, I mean, I can do the math, but it's a little tedious. But it also looks to me like the increases are getting quite substantial, and maybe that's just a fact of life. But I'd be interested in that information.
I share your interest. Angie, I did see your hand raised. Let me just, we've got a motion on the table we're discussing. Do you have something to offer that would be of help to us, Angie?
Perhaps. Ben, I think we might have a slide at the back of this.
Yeah, so I think the slide Angie's referring to is the adopted per year rate increases. So it's not that bi-monthly year over year increase, but it is a maybe more readable table for each of the 3 utilities that shows what was adopted as an increase in the fiscal year. So it is at the very tail end of the presentation.
Well, I suppose we could, Chairman O'Connell, I suppose we could table for the moment the motion and see what we think after the end of the whole thing. I don't know.
Where is that table?
I don't believe you will have it. It's at the end of this presentation that's before you on my screen. And so we can jump and share and I can go there and we can decide if that's going to be sufficient, or we can continue on with the presentation, hit it at the very end and then discuss.
Yeah, my concern, Angie, is we've got several different specific agenda items, and the agenda items are called out by the rates. And, we have to, absent a motion to change from our agenda, we have to follow our agenda. And that's why I was just approaching it that way, which is also what we have done historically. We have not just done it in one big omnibus motion. I sure don't mind. Would it make sense for members of the board Angie, if you can share screen again and call up the table that you think will help us?
Sure. Okay. All right. Let's do this. Go towards the back end here. Okay, here is what we were looking at in terms of 2013 through 2024, and then you have the water, the sewer local portion, and then the stormwater in terms of the actual rates that were approved, I believe. Is that correct, Ben?
Yep, that is correct.
Thank you. So I'll open up again. Todd, it's your motion. If you want to say anything, any other discussion on the motion that's on the table?
I appreciate everyone entertaining the request, so thank you. It does appear we have that historical data here is what I'm seeing. And unfortunately, I couldn't get the links to work on my laptop for some reason today, so I'm assuming that that data is available for review. And if so, I'm comfortable withdrawing the motion.
Well, I
given
mean,
that we have the
don't
data.
feel like you have to if you, I mean, let me ask the question because I didn't see this in our board packet. Do we have this data, Andy?
No,
Okay,
We can provide that.
yeah, let's do that. Meredith, you have your hand raised.
I know, I have a lot to say apparently. Um, it seems to me that last year when we talked about this, we were, and I think Steve Milton was a proponent of this. We were a little concerned last year about the 8% increases going for the next X number of years. And I think we authorized it as a 1 year only thing last year. I'm not sure I'm ready to make any motion decisions personally right now, but I mean, you can see in this slide kind of just what's happened to rates over the years, and you know, it's of some concern to me.
Yeah, I mean, 8% a year, you don't have to keep that on going on pretty more before you've just doubled your rates. Councilman Jacobson, yes, sir.
I would appreciate, for the purpose of my colleagues having to answer questions from what may be a somewhat irate population here, if this exhibit we're looking at right now could be extended or could be modified so that it would have 25 and 26 on it, and then provided the members of the utility board. And because it would be my intent to share that with my colleagues on the city council, because they count on me to provide information and put them in the position to be able to answer questions of constituents. So if that's possible, and I'm sorry, Angie, to, ask you to do more with your, your exhibits, but this does summarize a lot of information that would be useful to those of us who are elected to govern this place.
Sure.
Thank you.
Jason. Jason, I see you have your hand raised.
Yep. Sorry. Just a couple of quick thoughts. I'll just remind the board that although we're looking at rates over the course of the biennium, we do come back to the utility board every fall and do a mid-biennial budget or rate adjustment or update. And so although you may see a projection for 8% across both years, again, things can change throughout the course of the year. Projects can get delayed. Every once in a while, projects come in under budget. Every once in a while, projects come in over budget. So there's an opportunity to revisit the rate every year, which we do with the board. So just a reminder to the group about that. And then as far as the 8% goes for this year, the team, the staff team here talked about this at extensive length, and you heard my introduction on the capital needs for our utilities in particular, and that is really what's driving this rate predominantly. And it is tied to staffing levels, right? We have to staff up our engineering or our capital division team to help get these projects done. The costs are not getting cheaper to replace infrastructure within our system. Each year, those costs are going up, and so that is what you see as a key component to driving those costs up. Is just the sheer cost of the capital projects. I'll also note that the transmission line is a proposed project. It hasn't been approved yet. And so obviously if the decision is made not to move forward with that project, that could back a pretty significant project out of the fold as well. And then the last piece I'll remind the board is, we do project the projects, we plan out the work based off the available resources. So maybe perhaps years ago that wasn't necessarily the case, but we take a really hard look at what work can get done. And I will tell you, the work that's driving the capital work plan on the water side is really critical work, really important work. And that's why what you're seeing is being proposed. Nothing is, unfortunately, on the water side, nothing really is something that we can take a pass on, at least in my professional opinion. I do think that as we get into some of the other rate discussions on the sewer and the stormwater side, you haven't seen this yet, but we did try and change our workload, prioritize our work differently. But certainly we tried to right size the work that's in front of us for the next biennium as well.
Absolutely. And Jason, I hope you're not taking any of these questions that people are asking as any kind of criticism of the work you and your people do.
Absolutely not. That's, you asked why we're spreading this out, of course, across 2 meetings, and this is why. I mean, I know that this is a significant rate increase. It's been ongoing for the last few years, right? As we've just seen. So we I understand that. I appreciate the board's deliberations and discussions, but I also want you to understand the importance behind the critical infrastructure work that we have in front of us as well.
Absolutely. I don't think you've seen anyone in this board shy away from recommending to the council. Let's not forget, we don't decide anything. We're recommending to the council what is necessary when it's necessary. Councilmember Jacobson.
Yeah, I'm sorry to jump in here, but I appreciate what Jason just had to say, and that is a conversation that has occurred to some degree, and information that was given to the city council, and it's the emails we get from staff. But it's also, I think, very important to be able, for the council to be able to talk to its constituent groups about the fact that we have some needs that are very, very serious to be done. And if I were to criticize what we do as a city council and a government, I think we underinform our constituents. Because once informed, they generally are very supportive of maintaining the kinds of services that we're used to. But it's a task that is very important for the council to be able to begin articulating these things in open meetings and to the groups that we speak to. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Councilmember. I couldn't agree more. And like I said to Jason, $20.7 million for a transmission line is a lot of money, but that doesn't mean that it's not money well spent. So I think, but more information is better than none. Is there any other discussion? If not, I'm going to call the question so we can move on. The motion on the table is to request additional historical data for the water rates before the board moves on them. Is there any further discussion of that motion? Hearing none, I'll call for a question. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Meredith, you were muted.
Yeah, maybe I'll abstain. Or I'm fine either way.
All right.
But
I heard aye last, so I'm going to count you as that.
yeah, yeah.
All right. Let's move on then to the next item on the agenda, which I believe was sewer. Yes, there we go. So,
Wonderful.
Angie, we're back to you.
Thank you. Thank you for the active discussion. So in terms of the sewer revenue requirement, it's going to take a similar format to the water utility that we just went through, starting off with a little bit of background and then jumping into the updates and the recalibration that we've completed for this particular financial plan update. So in terms of operating and maintenance expenses, the King County Metro treatment costs are forecasted and updated based on the available information that we have based on their particular rate adjustment increases. And as noted before, 2025 is anticipated about 5.75%, with 2026 and in the future running from 7 to 9.25% in terms of King County. Now, again, we kind of isolate the King County treatment costs here, basically treating them as a pass-through. So whatever we're charged, we kind of pass on to the customer, but it's still a customer impact in terms of their eyes, I'm sure. The additional operating and maintenance costs related to the salaries that Ben had mentioned, the new compensation plan, in terms of salary schedules, as well as reclassification, have been also included in the sewer utility in terms of the operating and maintenance costs. And again, you can see there the changes from 2024 and 2025. Prior capital in terms of the study, what the study had included in the previous study for capital was about $30 million for 22 through 28. You will see an update there, not as significant as water, but it's still an increase due to inflationary costs and just needs. We had also anticipated that there would be some debt financing required to move forward with those particular projects during the last study. When we looked at the rate plan in terms of the future, or where we thought we would be today, in terms of 25 and 26, there was a projection of about 4.5% annual rate increases for this particular sewer utility. And so again, the job is, if we update, can we hold to the plan, or can that plan change? In terms of the operational forecast for the sewer utility, again, the bars being our expenses, we have operating and maintenance costs here. Those are city local portion costs. You can see the significance of the King County treatment costs here. That is in this particular color, kind of that ice blue that we have there. And again, those costs are increasing with the rate forecast that we have. So those treatment costs are increasing from 5.8 million to 8.8 million. Really what that is if we're looking at the total annual obligations of this particular utility, that's representing about 60% of those annual obligations. And because of their increasing costs, you're running close to 67% by the time we get out to the 2030 time period based on those rate increases. And so it takes a significant portion of the sewer bill. The existing debt service, again, here is about $1 million. It does get terminated by the year 2029 in terms of the existing debt that is on board in terms of the sewer utility, and that's with the lake line debt obligation. When we look at the sewer capital plan, 2024 to 2030, again, we had their prior was about $30 million. We're at 45.7 million here, again, just with additional costs. 2024 budget has about 6.4 million included in here. The additional costs that we have are based on city input, and as Jason had mentioned, have been really recalibrated to see if there were any changes in timing or cost or known reductions that may be out there that we could kind of shape those particular capital projects for the sewer utility. There have been some reprioritizations and some shifting out of costs. In particular, the Lake Line project is forecasted in the 2029 to 2030 time period. Again, there was a bit of concessions made in terms of some of the capital timing on the sewer side, again, to try to fit within what we had in our overall bounds that we had to work within. The city did want to have a little bit more time in terms of be able to do the due diligence if we were going to offer any additional increases from the prior rate increase. And so again, we did do our best with staff to be able to try to work into a workable plan here that was hopefully maintaining the plan as had been stated prior. In terms of funding sources, again, here we don't have any new debt for the sewer utility in the 25-26 time period, but in the 2027 time period, as you can see, costs kind of increasing over time with some of those lake line projects and other projects. We have about 16 million planned and 8.5 million planned for 27 through 30. Again, we'll come back and readdress that to see if there is that same need during the next rate update. When we bring all of the costs together, again, the bars being our expenses, the solid line being our current revenue, and the dotted line being the proposed increase. What you can see here is that big King County increase. Our own rates are slightly increasing over time, probably a little bit more than inflationary. What we do have here is the existing debt and then that assumed new debt as we move out over time from 2027 to 2030, again, based on those higher costs kind of coming in line and being scheduled out more in the 2027 period and forward. We are basically kind of meeting our operating costs through 2029, but again, we start hitting close to any type of projected operating costs when we get to 2029. Really, our rate increases are driven by having to be able to offer some capital financing through rates for the sewer utility. And so it's helping us build up this capacity reserve that we need to be able to fund the capital projects that we have identified. Good news is, again, that we are maintaining that 4.5 annual rate plan that we had anticipated, that we would, again, get that peak that we had in the last rate study that we thought it would be about 4.5, again, due to some concessions made with some of the capital project timing, where we're able to maintain that 4.5% increase on that local charge. In terms of the sample single family bill, Board Member Lair, I will apologize here. This is monthly. We do not have the bi-monthly. There was a lot of numbers and we couldn't fit in one slide, so we chose the monthly. And so what you can see here is there's a monthly charge, and this is the local portion. We're going to have the King County treatment portion, and then we're going to total the bill. What you can see here is the local portion is about $1.50 to $1.60 in terms of that 4.5% increase in terms of the impact for your customers. Really, the more significant bill impact is created from the King County Metro bill that is anticipated at $3 to $4 per month increase. So when you bring that all together, what we're looking at is about 4.71 to 5.69 in terms of that monthly bill impact. So again, that about $10 to $11 range on a bi-monthly basis. Key drivers again here being the additional capital needs identified, continuing capital needs identified. You obviously have some more lakeline projects out in the future. And really, you know, the treatment costs are also putting pressure, you know, on you when you're looking at the total bill. And so with that, I will stop there.
Question before we get to motions or whatnot, questions for Angie or anyone from the city? Meredith.
Yeah. What a surprise, huh? So Angie, I'm just looking at my bill and I don't see, you said you totaled it. On my bill, I see King County sewer flat and I don't see, and then there's sewer line maintenance and a line item for each. How does that tally up to what you're showing me here on this thing?
Then I might need your help there in terms of the bill format.
You've got a local bill amount and you've got a monthly treatment, which is I think the King County. thing. So Ben, is the local bill what is showing up on mine as sewer line maintenance?
You know, I'm not exactly sure. Board member Blair, I'm sorry about that.
I mean, there's only 2 entries that relate to sewer line, and it, you know, it says KC sewer flat 110, so that's the 55. And then it says sewer line maintenance 68, and I don't know. Yeah,
I'll go ahead and pass this question to Lawan Tuttle, our Deputy Finance Director.
yeah.
That's flat, so the King County is the King County portion, and then the sewer line maintenance is your city portion.
Okay. And then can we go back a slide? Can you remind me, I know it was defined earlier, what RFSR is?
Yeah, rate funded system reinvestment. So that's the amount of revenue that you're generating in cash to help pay for your capital needs. So you're not always having to debt finance things. We always want to make sure that we have some level that's being cash financed.
Got it. Got it. Okay.
Other questions? If I don't see any from any other board member, I do. And Angie, if this is for you, great. If not, to somebody else. I mean, one of the big drivers here, King County is passing some fairly healthy increases along. Is there any explanation from them as to how they justify a 7% or 8% increase as far as the eye can see?
What I'm understanding is that they also have quite a few capital needs and regulatory requirements that they're having to abide by that is increasing their trajectory in terms of their overall rate impacts as well. And again, feel free, Jason, if you want to add, or Chase, if you want to add some additional that you may know.
Yeah, I can just add that the King County increasing costs have been projected for a couple years now. A number of the local agencies pushed back on the proposed rate increase the last cycle. It was delayed. However, they do have, you know, again, I keep saying this, but Mercer's not alone, right? The number of utilities around the region are facing the same infrastructure challenges that we are. King County is no different. I'll also say, in terms of the regulatory requirements, they have some modifications and improvements to be made to their treatment facilities that have had some overflow challenges that may have made the media in the news in the past, and so that's obviously a component to driving costs as well.
Thank you. Any other questions for Angie or city members? If not, if anyone wants to make a motion, this would be the time.
Tim, did that motion from the last, it applies to all of the, I thought it applied to all of the remaining utilities. That's how it was framed.
Maybe I didn't hear it that way, Meredith, but I certainly understand if that's the sentiment. If you want to make a motion to that effect, please go right ahead and do so.
I thought that's how I heard it, and now I have to think about whether I want to do that or not.
Okay, Todd?
Yeah, thank you. I that was my intent. I thought I had made it in that manner, but perhaps I didn't. But that was my intent, was to have that historical look back for all the data that we're looking at for the various utility increases. Thank you.
Oh, very good. I had construed it in the context of the water discussion we were having, Todd. So thank you for the clarification. Can I just ask for my fellow board members, was that your understanding when you voted on it? So, because if so, we can stop talking about it.
That was my understanding.
All right.
And that was my
understanding.
understanding.
We'll consider it so clarified. Very good. And I'm in favor of it as well. So we'll consider it clarified to that extent. In light of that request for further information, is there other discussion at this time of the proposed sewer rate increases? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the next agenda item. Stormwater.
Stormwater. Okay, so now we're at the stormwater revenue requirement. Again, a similar format that we've been through with the other utilities. A little bit of background here. The operating and maintenance expenses, as noted by Ben, do include the new compensation plan for the new salaries, as well as the reclassification or the classification updates for the non-represented employees. Also, the reallocation of staff time to more accurately capture the anticipated needs and staff resources for this particular utility. I think that happens every, once in a while, you recalibrate to what those particular resource needs are. And then also contractual cost increasing for about almost 25% from 2024 to 2025. And you'll see that in the graphic in the next slide. And that's really to cover work including closed circuit television, video inspection, catch basin cleaning and repairs, and other contractual work. And that's really mostly related to the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination Program, so the NPDES requirements, some regulatory requirements that you have out there. And so also including those particular type of requirements included in those O&M costs. When we look at the capital, the previous study had estimated about 12.1 million in the 22 through 28 time period, with about 2.5 million in debt financing in terms of that plan. The rate forecast, when we looked at into the future, did continue on with the 8% annual rate increases for this particular utility as well. So again, trying to go back and recalibrate to see if that rate path has changed. A little bit less detail when it comes to stormwater, but still significant nonetheless in terms of 2024 and 2025. So that's the jump that you see here is those contractual costs as well as the salary increases and the reclassifications. Then it stabilizes over time in terms of after the 2025 time period. Operating and maintenance costs run about 1.9 to 2.7 million for the time period that we're looking at. But again, our focus is going to be on the 25-26 time period. Currently, there is no existing debt in the stormwater utility. In terms of the capital plan for the stormwater utility, 24 through 2030, again, as each of the utilities, it ebbs and flows. They're not quite as dramatic in terms of the annual adjustments. There are some peaks and some valleys, but in general, you're running about 1.7 to $2.1 million per year in the stormwater requirements. In total for the time period is about 13.7, so a slight increase from the last plan. 1.9 million is budgeted in terms of 2024. So you can kind of see that particular number here in that first column. And these again are just ongoing improvements at about that 1.7 to $2.1 million per year. In terms of funding sources, no new debt anticipated for this next biennial time period, but again, looking out into the future, trying to time it with also the water debt issuances because the stormwater is a bit smaller, so it would not make really a prudent decision to go out on its own for a $2 million or $1 million issue. So we are trying to time it and time the projects with the water and sewer, but we would be looking at a need for about a $2 million assistance from debt in 2027 and 1 million in 2030. But again, that's in that next period, rate setting period. Currently, again, these are our needs here. And so what we're looking at is the majority of that capital for this time period and for this particular utility is about 78% of the CIP actually funded through cash, about 3 million financed with debt. For the stormwater utility revenue requirements, what we can see here again is our operating expenses, and the green being our rate funded capital. Right now in 2024, it's meeting its obligations, but as you can see, if rates were maintained at the same level with the solid line, we are eroding our revenue capacity to be able to fund those particular capital projects that we have. And so that is therefore the need for that 8% rate increases, because as we saw, we were trying to fund a majority of the capital here with this particular utility through cash funding through our rates. And so we need to kind of build up this particular capacity for capital in terms of the stormwater utility. That does allow us to maintain that 8% annual rate plan that addresses the capital needs, as well as the rate funded system reinvestment for the stormwater utility. What that looks like, again, going bi-monthly and monthly for the stormwater utility. For a bi-monthly time period, that 8% represents about $3.71 to $4 on a monthly basis, slightly below $2, $1.85 for 2025, and about the $2 mark in 2026. Again, the drivers there being continuing on capital needs, as well as trying to cash finance some of those recurring kind of contractual type of requirements that are needed, as well as the overall capital needs that are needed, running in about the $1.7 to $2.1 million mark per year. With that, I'll stop there.
Great. Thank you, Andy. Questions? George.
Yeah, this is a very helpful table here, and I'm just wondering for 2024, even though the descriptor is a bi-monthly increase and a percent increase, is it possible to show what that rate is today so that people will have a little better feel for what it's going to be today versus in 2025 and 2026?
Are we talking about the 23-22?
Well, just a 24 number, because it's an 8% increase in the amount of $3.71. What is the current bi-monthly rate? I assume it's like what?
I believe it's 46.43. Chase, can you correct me if I'm wrong?
Yeah, George, I'm going to jump in because I'm actually looking at my bill and it says storm drain.
Okay, I get you.
43, and so the rate is the top line.
Yeah.
All right.
The second line is the increase amount.
All right, I was not reading that correctly.
Thank you for the clarification. That's important.
Other discussion? Well, hearing none, I will seek the consensus of the board, given that we clarified that the earlier motion was applicable to all of them. I assume there's no need for a motion for this discussion on this topic at this point. Do I see anyone disagree with your chair on that?
No, I'm fine.
Well, we agree.
Yeah, I agree.
Angie, thank you very much for your presentation. Very accurate. Very
I have
helpful.
a summary table if you'd like to see it all together.
Sure. Why not? There we go.
I just wanted to pause to make sure. Again, a lot of numbers, but here what you're going to see is all of the utilities combined. And so you're going to have your water bill, your local sewer bill, your metro sewer portion, your stormwater, and then the total bill. These are the current rates that you will likely see if you're, kind of that flat rate in your 2024 time period, followed by, again, the increases that we have been discussing in this line, with the difference dollar-wise and then the difference percentage-wise.
Right. Although, Angie, I would prefer to see this, or to see an additional one with the bi-monthly, because what we actually see is the bi-monthly numbers. Nobody is seeing these numbers. None of the citizens are seeing these numbers.
Will do.
Sure.
On the bill, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's easier to compare apples to apples.
Okay, yeah, not a problem.
Yeah, and they've been increasing a lot over the last several years. I think the historical data going back several years for this will be eye-opening, and it may just be that that's the way the world is. But I think I think Jake is right that there's really a lot of education that needs to be done.
For sure.
In light of the discussion we had about historical data, I would like to request, and I'll just make this as an ask, when that data is sent out, can we get a copy of these FCS slides? I find them very helpful, and it would be very useful to have this information and the ability to study it before the next board meeting.
Agreed.
That would be great.
Yes, absolutely. We'll be able to do that. And then we'll also, again, as noted, provide some additional 25-26 to the historical period for the rate kind of trends that have been happening or approvals that have been happening. And then the bi-monthly bill impact we'll have for you. And so just really quickly, this is the last slide in terms of kind of where we are today. September 10th is, your first glance at the water, sewer, and stormwater, as well as the EMS rate recommendations. We know this is a lot to take in terms of, needing to absorb it and, study it, et cetera. And so there is October reserved for additional rate discussion and recommendations that, likely staff will come back and try to solicit from you all, with potentially November reserved for additional discussion if necessary. And then finally, the overall goal is to have this as the recommendation as part of the city's master fee schedule on December 3rd.
Thank you. Can I ask Jason or anyone else from the city, is that that December 3rd, is that at least currently a hard date?
Chair O'Connell,
Yes.
Matt Mornick, yes, that is the scheduled date for City Council budget adoption and master fee schedule adoption. We cannot move from that date.
Very good. I ask because typically I make a presentation about the board's recommendations to the council. I want to make sure to get that on my calendar.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'll say again what I said before. I hope Jason and no one else from the city is taking our questioning as anything other than a great deal of respect for the work that you and your people do. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Totally. Yes, the board's asking great questions and appreciate the questions that are coming our way. So no offense taken.
Great. Well, going back to the agenda, we're done with the last item. Is there other business to come before the board? If not, I have a question for Jason, and I don't know if this is for you or for Alan. What's going on northbound Island Crest Way, just before you get to the freeway off-ramp? Why is there always water pouring out of the street, out of the middle of the street there? Do you know what I'm referring to?
I know. Alan, do you know what he's referring to?
Yeah, in the middle of the street there seems to be a puddle. We've actually done leak detection in that area on the piping there, and it's not coming from our system. So,
Okay.
I don't know if it's coming from an irrigation system for either one of
Rings.
ours or one of WashDOT's or whatever, but it's definitely not coming from us because we've done multiple leak detections on that piping. Yeah, we run into that.
Yeah, I mean, but there's always water pouring out of there.
Yeah, it's not coming from our system.
All right. That's what I wanted to hear.
Where is that again, Tim? Northbound Island Crest Way, just before you get on.
Just before the the on-ramp onto the express lanes, can't be more than 50 feet up from that. There's just there's always a water kind of, and it comes right out from the middle of the street.
I will just take the moment to add that Elaine Summergren is in the background. She's been a huge champion in getting all of the city's water meters replaced successfully. And I will just take the moment to say that our customer service team have been fielding a lot of phone calls from residents who are seeing increase consumption bills, consumption numbers, and utility bills lately. So kudos to Elaine and team, and we're working on the customer portal portion of it now in the background, and hopefully we'll have some information to share on timing with the customer portal soon. So, but I'll take that moment to share that Elena has been great in getting this project to where it's at now, and just based off the consumption and seeing leaks and stuff like that, we are definitely seeing more phone calls, and our customer service team is able to problem solve and prioritize that work with the customer on our end as well.
Yeah, congratulations, Elaine.
Indeed. I mean, that was part of, that's what's the saying? That's a feature, not a bug. I mean, that was part of why we did the water meter replacement program, is to capture water that's being consumed that wasn't being measured. And so Elaine and you and your team can absolutely congratulations. And thank you for your work on behalf of the island. All right, any other business? If not, I'll remind everyone, our next meeting is October 8th. Obviously, we have a lot more to discuss after this evening's discussion, but this has been a really good discussion, and hopefully it'll make our next meeting that much quicker. Anything else that should come before the board? If not, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Discussion? None? All in favor, say aye.
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 I declare it passed. Thank you very much, everyone. Been a very productive meeting. See you next month.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thanks all.